Well, thank you for joining with us today. My name's Ben. I'm part of the pastoral team here. And as Croydon Hills Baptist Church, one of the things that we want to be doing as a community is making sure that we're a community that supports one another and connects with one another. And part of that is we want to be a community that's there when times are difficult and when times are joyful. And we know at the moment, for a lot of people in our community, that times are very tough. That we're struggling with the season we're in. Here in Melbourne at the moment, we're in stage 6 lockdown, so it's pretty tough on us as a community, and we know that a lot of people are feeling it, and had a lot of conversations during the week with people who are struggling with mental health or with being isolated for prolonged, and there's also those that are struggling with work situations as well. And as a community, we want to make sure that we're here to connect and support with you guys in the reality of what you're facing in your lives. So as part of that, in the top corner of the video, there is a contact number. If you need any prayer or any pastoral care at the moment, please feel free to contact that number, and we've got a team there that's willing to connect with you, to pray with you, and to support you. As well, you can also contact the pastoral team. You can contact us either through contacting the office. No one's currently manning that actively at the moment because we are in lockdown, but we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as we can. Or you can send us an email to office@chbc, or you can connect with us through our church app under the contact part there and share your needs. And we want to make sure that as a community, we are reaching out, connecting and supporting one another at this time. But probably the other part of being part of community that we're really missing at the moment is the ability to celebrate together. And we know that there are people in our community that do have stories and events in their lives that are worth celebrating. Maybe these are stories of what God has been doing in your life. It might be also stories of engagements or births of children, things like that. And we'd love to be able to share those so as a community we can celebrate together. Because at the moment, probably the thing that we're feeling the most starved of just generally as society is good news, and news that is worth celebrating. And as Croydon Hills Baptist Church, we really want to be able to celebrate that as a community. So if you do have any stories, any events that have happened or things that you want to share of what God has been doing in your life, can you please send those through at news@chbc.org.au, and we'd love to be able to circulate those through our email and through our app, so as a community we can connect together and celebrate those things, because that's part of what our community is built upon, being able to support one another and celebrate together as we live out our faith in community here at Croydon Hills. And this morning we're going to be continuing with our sermon series through Isaiah. And we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 52. And honestly, as I was looking at this, I found this a very difficult and challenging passage. Because this passage is written for the Israelites, and it's essentially saying, now that you have freedom, now that you've been released from captivity, now that you've returned from exile, live like you're free. So essentially, now that you have freedom, live free. And I was struggling to put this together, wrestling through this passage, because I was wrestling with the question, are we free? Like so much at the moment, as I've spoken to people, as I've journeyed with people over the last few weeks, so much is feeling like we do not have freedom. We do not have things that make us feel free. Like with the current health pandemic and the response of our government to that, the thing like I can't travel more than 5 kilometers from my home. I can't see family and friends. For some people, I can't go to work, or work is struggling. And it raises this tension going, am I free? What is freedom? And I was looking at that and looking at this passage, I was like, how can we talk through this? Are we free? And honestly, the truth is yes. As Christians, we are actually free. So this passage does have a lot to speak to what we're going through today. And we are free, and we know that because 2,000 years ago, a rabbi, a teacher, emerged from the wilderness with a new kind of authority. He walked differently and talked differently to the other teachers of the law at that time. He was revolutionary. Everyone else at that time, all the other teachers, they brought rules and laws and heavy burdens that came with knowing who God was. If you want to know God, if you want to follow God, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it was hard. And it was hard to know God. But Jesus, this teacher, his yoke, the way he modeled how to follow God was easy. His burden, that was light. The way he said we need to connect with God was a way that was loving and kind. It could be summed up with the statement, do unto others as you'd have them do to you. The path that he modeled, the path that he walked, was a path of freedom, a path of love. To put others ahead of yourself and to love them. And for his disciples, the people who followed him, they were called to walk in the way he walked. They were called to model and carry his yoke forward, to look like him, to walk close to him. And at that time, it was well known that for a rabbi, for a teacher, they would collect followers, people to walk after them. And as they would walk around, those that modeled their life most closely, they would walk right behind them. And as the rabbi, the teacher, as they would walk along, they would flick up dust off the ground. And the closer you were to your rabbi, to your teacher, the more of this dust would fall on you. And this was considered a great honor and a blessing to be covered in more dust from your rabbi, because it showed that you were closer to them. Which is interesting, because when we look at the way Jesus walked and modeled, and we read passages in the New Testament where it says things like, if a community rejects you, shake the dust off your feet. He's not saying reject them. He's saying shake off my dust, the dust of loving them, of being kind to them. He's saying love and bless them, because he knew that the hope for the world was that it would be covered in the dust of Jesus. The world would be walking the way that Jesus walked. And Jesus ultimately showed what this love looked like by continually saying yes to loving. And when people struck out against him in evil, he said, I'll do one better in loving and serving you. And he will come out with lines like, greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. And as we look at the life of Jesus, the people that he brought as friends, these were people who were broken, people who were hurting, the ones that others overlooked. You see, Jesus, the way he walked, he called people who were sinners, people who didn't follow God, to come to know God. And he ultimately laid down his life in love as a sacrifice for the world, so that their sins and their brokenness could be forgiven and that they could be free. Free to walk the way Jesus walked. Free to walk in his dust, unashamed, with no burden. To love freely, to forgive freely, to share Jesus' yoke, to share Jesus' way, to share his dust as the hope for the world. So we are free. If we're Christians, as we're followers of Jesus, we are free. We're free to live like Jesus and to follow his way of love. And we know as a reality for us that life is tough here in Melbourne at the moment. Life is tough around the world. There's tough circumstances. Here there's tough laws and stay-at-home orders that are realities, and these affect us. They affect businesses. They affect communities. They affect you and they affect me. We're feeling it. It's an impact. Our way of life, the way that we're normally used to living, this has been impacted. But church, together, let's remember that we are free in the midst of this. Free to live lives that Jesus has called us to live. So in light of that, in light of knowing that even the circumstances around us that make us feel not free, we are still free, let's jump into this passage from Isaiah today. At this time in the book of Isaiah, we see that the nation of Israel has returned from captivity. They've returned to Jerusalem, but there's a problem. After a generation of being in captivity, what seems a lifetime of living in oppression, of living a lifetime of trials and hardships, the way of life that they're used to has been lost. All their customs have been stripped away. And now they've lost sight of the hope that they have, of the people that God has called them to be. Yes, whilst they're free, they're walking around with a weight of oppression over them. The labels they're carrying, the way they're living, is living as a people who aren't free. They are people who are indeed free, yet they walk around in this weight. This is a tragedy. We need to understand this in the story. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to be free, yet to live as a slave. It's a tragedy to have hope, yet live in despair. To have everything, yet live under the weight of labels and lies and bondage. To be a broken people. to be free, yet live in brokenness. These are the people of Isaiah 52. And God then speaks to them saying, "Awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion, put on beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For there shall be no more come into you that are uncircumcised and the unclean." This passage, as we read it, it's not being read like in that voice of a mother that's going, "Awake, are you awake in there? It's time to get up and put on your strength." This is more like a harsh, violent wake-up call that's being delivered with the deepest yearning of love. It's like grabbing hold of someone's shoulders and shaking him, saying, "Snap out of it." Essentially saying, wake up to yourself. You are free, yet you're living like you're dead. And whilst this is a reality for the Israelites at this time, I need to admit that for myself, for what was the majority of the first part of this year, I lived in the same space. I spent time where I'd lost hope I lost sight of the hope that I had in Jesus. I lost sight of what his finished work looked like. I lost sight of who I was in him. And what I saw was the weight of the circumstances around me that just weighed me down. Well, I wasn't walking in strength or a blessing. And maybe you can find yourself in a similar place to that today. So right now there's so much in our lives that tries to steal the hope and joy that we have. So much has been taken away. Like there are the real struggles and pressures that we face in this season, this lockdown season, this response to COVID season. And I've spent most of my week doing mental health conversations and checkups with people who are just fighting to hold on to this hope. It's a reality. There are uncertainties. There are other pressures that we've kind of washed over in this season as well, like where we just dwell on the fact of lockdowns, but we know that there's other pressures for such things like we know at the moment that addictions are on the rise. There's people who use them as coping mechanisms. There's a continuous sense of this weight of guilt and shame and condemnation that marks people's lives. There's also carers fatigue as people try to support so many people around them and they're trying to hold everything together and they're wearing out. There is so much that is stealing joy, that is dominating our reality. And these things end up blinding us to the truth. It's real easy to live in the reality of chasing these things where they can lead us away from hope and they start to spiral us down. And we can lose sight of what Jesus has done and how we should live in response to this. But can I plead with you this morning, church? Can I plead for myself this morning that it's time for us to wake up? It's time for us to wake up to the reality of what Jesus is doing in us and through us. Wake up to the truth of who God is. Because if I'm honest, right now, as I look at our world, we need it more than ever. People need hope and good news more than ever. And last week, I was able to share a couple of the key foundational truths that God is still in control. He's on the throne and he holds the future. And if we believe in this, it can give us a confidence for how we live today and a strength to love and serve the world around us. And as we do that, it gives us the ability to share the hope that we can find in God. Now, I play a lot of football, and I've shared this before, but it's funny because in a moment of crisis on a football field, you can really see how people respond. Like there are some people, when it's in crisis, they get their back, they dig in, when their back's against the wall, they dig deep and they find a strength. And they stand up again. They encourage others to do the same. And they fight harder. Even if you're losing, they dig in and fight harder. And then there are other players. And these players, they crack it. They storm off. They start abusing people. They complain. They blame others. They have a go at the coach and the ref. They throw their boots. And I've got both types of players in the teams that I play in. Maybe you can picture people that respond that way. And I think what God's saying in this passage to us is what the world needs now is the church to wake up, to draw on strength, and to love and live like Jesus, to respond in that first way, to dig deep, to help heal pain, to heal hurt and brokenness that's in our world. I don't think what we need right now is another voice that can complain and blame, another voice that lives in captivity. But what we need is a community that is willing to live the way Jesus lived, despite the circumstances they find themselves in, to live a life of love, of care, and of service to others. I think this is what God's calling in the community for the Israelites at this time. Now that you're free, live that way. Now that you know and tasted freedom, live as a light to the world around you. So let's continue. In verse 2 it says, "Shake yourself from the dust and arise. Be seated, O Jerusalem. Loose the bonds from your neck, O captive daughters of Zion." It's talking about dust here, and it's like when we shared at the start, when you're following Jesus and you're following your rabbi that kicks the dust up onto you. I'll ask the question, what dust is covering you this morning? What dust is covering you today? What are you following? Are you walking closely behind Jesus and God in the way He wants us to live, or are the circumstances around us covering us in dust? For me, at the start of this year, I was walking very close to the dust of despair, and that's what was marking my life. And as I've had conversations and as I've looked around, I think there's probably 3 responses to the current lockdowns that I'm hearing where it's kicking the dust up onto our lives. The first one is that we can be covered in the dust of lockdown fatigue. It takes its toll on us. And this plays out in frustration at others. We can be frustrated because when's this going to end? I don't know what's going on. How can I plan anything? Others, it plays out with being at breaking point. And I've sat and I've cried and I've sat with many people who have been crying in this, where it's just the dust of this season. It's taking its toll. It's wearing us down. The second response that I've seen a lot of is the dust of entitlement. This is where people say, I'm free, I can just do what I want. Who can tell me what to do? I'll just go, the rules don't apply to me. I can live freely, and this freedom, I can justify making the decisions to do whatever I want. The dust of entitlement. And there are those in the third category that are covered in the dust of Jesus. These are the people that are trying to seek the betterment of society at this time, where they walk around and they're looking for opportunities where they can be light and hope despite the circumstances, where they can be a unifying force in society, where they can start revealing God's heart of transformation, heart of love and of hope. Where do you find yourself today? What dust is covering you? What dust are you carrying? If it is the dust of Jesus, you'll see that that is one that brings life abundantly wherever you go. But again, as I said, for me at the start of this year, I'd lost that. I walked too closely behind the dust of despair, of all the things that I couldn't do, of all the expectations that I and others had placed on me, all the expectations I wanted and desired and I couldn't meet. And it was crippling, because my eyes had strayed from Jesus. My mind had warped from His ways, and my hope and my spark had gone. I had a friend remind me and give me permission to be the person that God created me to be, to embrace that. And it sounds silly saying this, but at the time they gave me permission to have fun again, to laugh and muck around. I had another friend remind me that the best times that we had together was when Jesus was at the center of our relationship. But I was at risk at that time of putting myself in the center, of making everything about me. I covered myself in a dust that wasn't Jesus, and I was going around not as a blessing. I wasn't going around forwarding His love, but actually spreading this dust of hopelessness. If we are not walking close to Jesus, we need to shake off that dust we are carrying and run back to Him. And this passage here, it's not a passage of condemnation at all. It's a passage of hope and grace. For we don't find God judging or condemning Israel for carrying this dust. No, what we see is a call to remember who we are, to free themselves from the heavy weight that's weighing them down, and be free. Remember that we are free. And we are free. In Jesus, his yoke is easy and his burden is light, so that despite the circumstances we find ourselves in, if we are awakened to him, we can be free. And you know that this is the strength that held so many Christians over the centuries, Christians who faced persecution and trials and challenges, where they were able to dig deep and stand tall for God in the midst of what was going on to them in the persecution or going on around them. Because they were awakened to who God was. They were dressed in his strength, and they shook off the dust of the circumstances around them, so that the only dust they carried was that of Jesus, and gave them the confidence and strength to love and serve and live the way God wanted them to live, and be a sacrifice for the benefit of others. Because when we're free to carry Jesus' yoke and burden, free to walk in his ways. And all that abounds in us and through us is the good news, this good news that we can be free of liberation despite the circumstances. That we can live out this freedom in a way that's transformative for our society. And this is good news. In verse 7, we can see that it says, "How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The voice of your watchmen, they lift their voice. Together they sing for joy, for eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion." How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news, who bring hope for our world, that we can be free despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. This is the message that we're carrying. If we're carrying the yoke of Jesus, this is good news. And to be honest right now, people are hungry for it. Our world is hungry for it. They need good news. They need a hope. They need to be able to see a community that is founded in this hope, who's living this hope, when everything around us seems so bleak, that they have access to this truth and this light and this hope. And John talks about it this way. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And through all things were made through him, and without him not anything was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." This is good news. Like, imagine at this time, if people looked at the church right now as those who represent Jesus and commented about us, saying, there is a life about them. There is a light that cuts through all the darkness in the world at the moment. And no matter how bad things can get, it's like the darkness cannot overpower the love and the hope that they have. This would be good news, wouldn't it? Like, if people looked at us and we were known as a community that had a strength and a hope and a love. You see, if we know God and walk the way that Jesus intended, then this should be our reality. This should be the reality of how people see us and respond to us. We should be a people that bring light wherever we go. In our freedom, not living out entitlement, but living out blessing and hope and love. This is honestly what Christian freedom is. This is what the good news is. It's a freedom to show an unrestrained love to those around us. It is a freedom to reflect a confidence and hope in Jesus. It is a freedom to walk in the way that Jesus did, to respond how he does, and to rise above all evil in love and sacrifice. And it is a freedom to, when we're rejected, hated, cursed, battered, bruised, beaten, it's a freedom to rise again, to shake off the dust of Jesus in love and blessing to those around us, and to continue to live how Jesus lived. It is a freedom to lay down your life and follow Him. It is a freedom to not let the circumstances dictate our response, but a freedom to follow Jesus despite what the circumstances are around us. Because we are free to follow Jesus, the person of the good news, to live this good news and to share this good news. So finally, in the closing words of this section in Isaiah chapter 52, it says, "Depart, depart, go out from there and touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her, purify yourself, you who bear the vessels of the Lord. You shall not go in haste, you shall not go in flight, for the Lord will go before you, and the Lord God of Israel will be your rear guard." When we're awakened to who we are, when we're awakened to following God and living out this way, when we shake off the dust of circumstances, we're able to dwell with God in us. We're able to live a life that shows the love of Jesus to the world around us. It's my prayer that we may know that even in this time, that God is still going before us in the world around us. He's active in our world. He hasn't been caught off guard. He hasn't ceased to work. There's ample opportunity to be sharing and living out the good news. So my prayer for us that we'll be able to live out this life and this freedom. But to get there, we must first awaken to the fact that we are free as God lives in us. We must shake off the dust and live a life of following Jesus' yoke as God moves through us. And that we may depart from here today and step out into the world where God is already moving amongst us and inviting us to partake in that. So where does this leave us today? I think it leaves us with one of three options. Firstly, if you look at the circumstances of this time and you realize that your faith was a faith where you believed things about God, but you don't know God personally, that has been drowned out completely by this season, I want to invite you to come to Jesus today, to wake up and come to Him as the source of all strength and life, the one who can give you a hope for this season, who can set you free as you live in response to Him. And if you do want to come to Jesus today, I encourage you to cry out to Him. Reach out to Him. Message a friend. Put a comment in the chat. Contact one of the pastoral ministry team. We'd love to pray with you and connect with you and share what this can look like in this season. That you'll come to Jesus. Or maybe you find yourself in a position that was similar to me at the start of the year, where your eyes have drifted, where you know God, but the reality of your life, it's been choked and drowned out by the circumstances around you. I encourage you to shake off that and come back to Jesus today, to run to Him, to be renewed in Him, and to cover yourself in His dust, to walk close to Him. So that if you find yourself in that place walking close to God at this time, that you can live out this hope. Live out this hope to the world around us that needs to see the good news that we have, the good news of knowing that we are free despite the circumstances, the good news where we can see God at work in us, moving through us and in the community amongst us as we awaken to Him. Shake off the dust and the weight to only be covered in the dust of Jesus, to proclaim the good news as we depart from here to live out this hope today. Let's pray. Father, I pray for everyone in our community, everyone that's part of Croydon Hills and part of our broader society and part of your church, that we would be awoken to the support and strength that we can find in you, awoken to the life that we have in you, that you would send your Spirit at this time to strengthen us. We know that situations and circumstances are hard, that there's so much that is seeking to distract and pull us away. But Father, I pray that you will renew in us the sense and the knowledge that we are free in you, that despite the circumstances around us, we can live out that freedom as a way to bless and love and serve our communities. Father, would you strengthen us? Would you be with us and draw us closer to you, so that when people see us, they will be able to say, as your church, we are a people that no matter how dark it gets, there is a life and a light that cuts through, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And that light is you. May they see that, see you, and know the good news. I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.